Yeah, it takes like 2 minutes. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Hey guys, this is Thomas Panter and my friend Don Don here. We are with. Oh, let me add him to the scene. Oh, guys, we are with Dr. David Livingstone Smith today. Is that how you say it, or is it Livingston? Livingston, David Livingston Smith. All right, guys. Well, um, I want you.
Real quick, Thomas,
Would
you
you
sure you
rather?
added him? You sure you added him to the scene? I don't see him in the
Let's
scene.
see. Make sure. Oh,
There we
did that
go.
do it? Okay.
There I
Okay.
am.
There we
There
go.
we go.
There we go. All right.
Let me move my camera
Uh,
here.
would you rather me introduce you, or would you rather introduce yourself?
Hey, I don't care. Whatever
Okay,
you.
I'm gonna read. I'm gonna read a little bit about you to the audience here.
Okay.
So David is a philosopher, author, and professor at New England University. Is that right?
University of New England.
University of New England. He's known for his work in the fields of philosophy, psychology, cognitive science, all kinds of those fields within cognitive science. He has written extensively on these topics related to dehumanization, evolution, and even things like the philosophy of mind. Um, One of his most notable books, I would say, is Less Than Human: Why We Demean, Enslave, and Exterminate Others, in which he explores the psychological and philosophical aspects of dehumanization itself. The book delves into historical and contemporary examples of dehumanization and the impact it has had on human societies. So that's mainly, I guess, we can talk about anything. I don't mind going into any subject. I love all philosophy and all psychology. We're both kind of nerdy about psychology. So,
Okay.
um, yeah, I guess the best thing. Let me go plug your books here, because you've got 2011, Less Than Human, the one that I just mentioned. Then you've got on Inhumanity, which is Dehumanization and How to Resist It. That was 2020, right?
Yep.
Yep. And then you have The Uncanny Power of Dehumanization, which
Well,
was
the first part is making monsters. The uncanny
Making
power
Monsters. I see that now.
of
Okay, yeah, Making
dehumanization. Yeah.
Monsters, The Uncanny Power of Dehumanization. That was 2021. So, guys, please go to Amazon, buy the books. I have not read any of them. I'm so sorry I didn't have time to. It's been the holiday season, or I would have probably read your. I don't know which one I would have chosen, but I would have
The
had
best
to.
one to start with is On Inhumanity.
Okay. All right.
Why?
Most user
Why is that one
friendly.
the best one to start with?
Well, I wrote it for a very general audience. So it's short chapters. Each chapter is the length of, say, a blog essay.
Yeah.
So you can pick it up, put it down easy. But it's there's no sacrifice of accuracy or rigor. It's just non-academic.
Okay.
So you
Right.
could think of that as sort of the undergraduate version, and Making Monsters is the graduate version.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Well, let's talk about. Do you? I have questions, of course, for you, but
Okay.
let's talk. Let's
Shoot.
talk about Inhumanity. Can we dive a little bit more into that?
Well, it's the same. On Inhumanity, you're going to get the same picture as Making Monsters. So we're dabbling into my current views on dehumanization. Yeah.
Okay. Hold
So,
on a second. My internet's
So
being weird.
you know,
Oh,
it's
go
been
ahead.
weird.
Go ahead now.
So let's just off the bat, like we're seeing a conflict in Ukraine, we're seeing a conflict in Israel, and we're seeing a lot of dehumanization happening in these conflicts.
yeah.
Um, what is like the major thing that you see how dehumanization happens in war? Because that would be different than the way dehumanization happens when we look at, for example, homeless people walking down New York City,
Well, I
right?
think we have to start with something more basic, which is
Okay.
what is dehumanization?
Yes.
Because that word is thrown around a lot, and people mean very, very different things by it. Ever since it was introduced into the English language in the early 19th century, it's just accumulated lots of different meanings. So even
Mhm.
scholars, don't agree on the meaning they give to that word. Now, there's not a right meaning and a wrong meaning. It's just we have to be explicit about what we mean. So here's what I mean. To dehumanize others is to conceive of them as subhuman creatures. So it's dehumanization, something that happens in your head. It's a psychological process, but you can't really understand it outside of the social and political context. In other words,
Mm.
you can't just look in people's heads. I think you have to look at what people's heads are in order to understand dehumanization. So it's
Mhm.
not just bad treatment, and it's not just atrocity. It's not just using slurs. It's a it's a kind of mental state.
A mental state.
Yeah, it's state of mind.
Yeah.
So if you look at me, let's say you're a hardcore Nazi, and I'm a Jewish guy, which I am, in fact.
Don Don is Jewish, by the way.
Okay, yeah, well, we could do it. You look at Don Don, you look at me, and oh, happy Hanukkah, Don Don.
Yes, happy third night of Hanukkah.
Um, and you would see us as what the Nazis called Untermenschen, subhumans. Um,
Yep.
Now, that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because well,
To
you know,
create
we
classes of
look like
humans.
human beings, but
Yep.
but you would think of us as less than human creatures, dangerous less than human creatures, and we find that process in war. We find it in the Hamas war,
Yes,
on both sides, by the way,
of course.
and in the Ukraine war as well.
Yep.
It's pretty standard in war, especially when the opponent is racialized. The opponent is seen as belonging to a different race because dehumanization and race are very, very, very closely and intimately connected.
Mm.
Do you think like so? This creating so does human dehumanization always have to do with subhuman, like less than, or could it just be like other as opposed to less than?
No, I think other is too broad
Okay.
for my taste. So I think it's really important to make distinctions, clear distinctions, because there's a lot of bad stuff, right? There's dehumanization, there's sexism, there's misogyny, there's ableism, there's transphobia. We could go on and on.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's really important not to lump these things together. Because if we want to intervene, that is, if we want to constrain or eliminate any of these things, we need to pop the hood and look at how it works. And there, making clear distinctions is really important. So
Mm.
othering is a very broad, very general
Yeah.
notion. So xenophobia is othering,
Okay.
Yeah. It
but that
is.
falls short of dehumanization. Homophobia is othering. It
Yeah.
falls
Okay.
short of
Yeah.
dehumanization.
Dehumanization. Okay.
So the underlying substance here is sub a
So,
class of subness. Like
yeah,
a supervenience kind of thing.
yeah.
Um,
Sub in a very radical sense, right?
yeah. Yeah.
In a very
Extremely radically.
basic sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Go
what
ahead.
is this other? What is this other form or notion that people describe when they say dehumanize? Because you said people disagree on this, right? So you
Well,
hold
they
the
they
idea.
use all right. So most of the literature on dehumanization is in social psychology.
Mm.
And when I came on the scene with my first book on dehumanization in 2011, virtually all of it was in social psychology. And even social psychologists have different views. So the main view in social psychology is that dehumanization involves attributing either animalistic or machine like traits to others. I disagree with that view. Another social psychological notion is that dehumanizing others is to see them as mindless, as not having minds.
Yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
Yet another version of the social psychological view is to see the dehumanized other as having no agency and no experience. It's kind of similar to the mindless
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
notion.
it sounds similar to it,
Yeah,
but it's different in the sense of like you could say that like I don't know, like a chicken has a mind but doesn't really have experience that we care about, right?
yeah.
Okay.
The folks who kind of take that view uh, would agree with you. I don't take that view. I think it's inconsistent with paradigmatic examples of dehumanization.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's delve into that because that I think that's interesting,
What the
Okay,
right?
so
yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
let's talk about mindlessness. Uh, well, here's a paradigmatic example of dehumanization: Nazi anti-Semitism.
Oh yeah.
I've already mentioned Nazis saw Jews as Untermenschens, as subhuman. Uh, But they also thought of Jews as fiendishly intelligent. So anything
Okay.
but mindless and anything but lacking in agency, they saw Jews as controlling the world and
Yeah.
as their mortal enemy because of that.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
I think that the mindlessness view, it
Falls
falls the
apart.
first hurdle.
Yeah, that's easy. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's an automatic example and negation of what that means.
yeah, yeah. The other view, the attribution of animalistic or machine like traits, this is a little bit more complicated, but I don't think that is what happens when we see others as human or subhuman. I think that what happens is not that we attribute traits to them, but rather that we attribute a kind of essence to them. Now,
Mm.
to explain that properly, I have to go into a little bit of psychology. So,
I'm down.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
you
down.
okay,
would have to define humanity in order to say dehumanization of a
that's
person.
right. No, that's very
Correct.
Right.
important.
So
And,
Yeah.
yes. So before we go, let's define humanity. What is it that makes something uniquely human that differs from
okay, cool.
dehumanness?
Okay, so again, there's disagreement about this, and I have a view which is different from all the prevailing views.
Mm.
So, what's a human? Well, you ask most reasonably educated people, and they'll say, well, science has told us what a human is. It's a member of the species Homo sapiens. But if you actually look at the scientific literature, that's not the case. So some people say human equals Homo sapiens, some say it equals genus Homo, some say it equals every one of our lineage since we parted ways with the chimpanzees about 6
Mm.
million years ago. It's all over the map. And the reason it's all over the map is that human isn't a scientific concept. It's
Hmm.
a folk concept. It's a
Social.
vernacular
Yeah.
concept. And so the question, well, what's a human being, then is a philosophical question, not a scientific question.
I agree. I actually agree a lot. I
It's
feel a
about
lot
the
of times.
relationship between two different vocabularies. You could
Mm-hmm.
put it that way.
Mm. Yeah.
Now, if we actually look at the way it's used more generally, so some people would say human equals all the things I just mentioned, the various scientific usages. Some, like the Nazis, would say human equals the Aryan race. Some would say human equals the members of my ethnic group or even my
Mm-hmm.
village. Uh, so, what do all these things have in common? That's the question I ask. And my answer is human actually means my kind, however you think of
Mm,
my kind,
my kind. Okay.
because the humanity of the speaker is never in question, right? It's always the others, someone else. So human equals my kind. Therefore, when we dehumanize others, part of the story is they are not my kind.
Mm.
And I mean my kind in a very radical sense, my essential kind, or
Yeah.
maybe more accurately, our kind, because it has to do with
Yeah.
collectives rather than
Yeah.
individuals.
Do you think that was kind of going through the minds of the Nazis that ran Auschwitz, and they have pictures of them enjoying themselves on weekends and going out to parties and all this?
Sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure. The Jews were not my kind. They didn't have a human essence. They
Yeah.
were they were radically other and dangerously other.
In a lot of conversations that Thomas and I have with people, philosophical conversations, like a lot of times, I bring up this idea, like people say, "Oh, you can't treat an animal inhumanely, or you
Mhm.
can't treat a dog in this way. It's not a human way. Like you're treating it inhuman as if it's not a human."
Yeah.
Uh, is that something that, in a way, it's the opposite of dehumanizing? It's taking something that we can consider, we make it into like a human, we
Well,
bring it into our
if you
category.
include it as my kind, it's human, on my view.
Okay.
Mm.
So
So like,
my dog that passed away this year, we're
sorry.
still getting over it.
Sorry about that.
She was we called her a certain person. That was our term for her. In
That's
every significant respect, we treated her as one of us,
yeah.
as our kind.
Yeah.
So it just depends upon how you want to draw that circle of inclusion.
Mm.
What beings you want to identify with.
Or like what beings have like like have moral consideration almost?
No, because look,
No?
that would
Okay.
exclude babies from the category of human.
That's true. That's true. They don't have moral consideration until what? object
Later.
permanence,
It's
Oh no,
great.
right?
I was gonna say that
Past
we
object
have more.
permanence and all that.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say that we have moral consideration towards them,
Ah,
like
well,
the
but we can
opposite
have
around.
moral consideration towards dogs or fish. I mean, it depends upon
Depends.
what beings we regard as worthy of moral consideration. Some people have moral consideration to plants, or
Some people
even inanimate objects, books.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you look at hoarders, you know
yeah.
those. Yeah,
Well, look at people's attitude towards sacred books, uh,
yeah.
Hmm.
or monuments, or corpses. I mean,
Hmm.
these are all things that many people have morally consider are seen as morally considerable. So that's a very fluctuating category.
So so just the consideration of what is human, the way people, individuals, because you said you're taking like an individualistic
Yeah.
approach to try to understand dehumanization.
Mhm.
It's not just like the social one where we're like, oh, it's by some sort of operation, like comparing humans to an animal. That'd be a social way to approach it. You're taking an individual human understanding of
I'm
what do
doing
people do.
I'm doing both because
Both.
the notion of the human, and actually more particularly departures from it, notions of dehumanization, tend to be ideological, and ideological notions are collective by definition.
Yeah,
Okay.
socially constructed. Yeah.
Yes, so we're born into a culture at a certain time in a certain
Hmm.
place, and that to a great extent calls the shots of how we see the world
Yeah.
socially. Of course, all of us can rebel against that to some degree and push back against that, but it's not easy because we're all marinated in these ideas.
We're enculturated in that marinating sauce.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Don Don. I see questions in your eyes.
Yeah,
I,
I see them too.
I have questions, and I'm trying to understand. So like, what is the experience of someone who dehumanizes? Like, not just like, oh, I think of them as less, like the way the Nazis thought of the Jews, or the
Yeah.
way the Japanese thought of non-Japanese during World War II, or whatever it might have been.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
like for the person who's going through it, is like, do you think that there's cognitive dissonance? Like, what is happening? Not just from like
Yes,
an
yes.
operation,
Yeah.
but like a philosophy of mind way to explain it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So this is really crucial to my take on dehumanization. And there is cognitive dissonance in my view, and that makes it worse.
Okay.
Hmm.
So give me a few minutes and I'll try and set this out. Uh, I'll make, as my grandmother used to say, a long story bearable.
Take your time.
Take your time. Yeah.
Okay.
Take your
Right.
time.
So here's something about our species, and this is totally non controversial. Um, we are what biologists call an ultra social species. We're extremely, extremely social. I mean, just look what we're doing here. I mean, we're talking as though we know one another. We're not tempted to rip each other's throats out. At least I hope. Uh, but we've just met, and that's human beings are by far the most social mammal there is. Um, and our sociality extends very, very far. So, for most social animals, sociality extends only to the immediate breeding group. But in our case, it's quite different. And we know that because human beings have been engaged in, say, long distance trade since deep into prehistory. And trade requires these social relationships of exchange, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's just a fact. And here's a fact about any social animal. Social animals have to have powerful inhibitions against lethal violence against community members for obvious reasons, right? Again, if you're killing each other, you can't maintain a cooperative social existence. We find that in all social animals, right down to the ants who do this with chemical signals. Um, so, human beings being ultra social, two things follow from that. And one is might sound a little bit puzzling. We must have powerful inhibitions against lethal violence against one another. That's a condition of ultrasociality and even sublethal violence, by the way. Now, the second is that we're exquisitely sensitive to members of our own kind, particularly in response to the sight of a human face. You look at a human face, and in particular, a pair of human eyes, and you just can't help seeing human. Boom. It's automatic. It's modular.
Mirror neurons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We know there's an extensive literature in neuropsychology that shows that our brains process faces differently than anything else. Faces are special.
Yeah.
So you might say, well, um, that seems strange because if history is littered with corpses, right? So
Yeah.
where do you come off saying that there are these powerful inhibitions against lethal violence in our species?
Hmm.
Well, there's another fact about human beings that we need to bear in mind. We've got these great big brains, and we're capable of imagining alternative scenarios and thinking instrumentally. And we're capable of recognizing, it really might be beneficial if we wiped out those people on the other side of the hill. We could steal their stuff, we could enslave them, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
Now, okay, now this is all window dressing here.
Yeah.
Um, so, a final important feature about our species, and this is an essential feature of human culture. Philosophers call it the division of cognitive labor. We have experts. Experts I define as people who are supposed to know. They might not
Okay.
really know, but they're supposed to know. And we defer to them, and it's entirely reasonable to defer to them. To give you an example, I'm sitting on a chair here in my study, and microphysicist says this chair is mostly empty space. And I agree, even though that's not what my eyes tell me, because the microphysicist is supposed to know, right?
They're an expert.
Yeah, they're an expert. So I defer. I cognitively, I epistemically defer. Okay, now this sets up a very interesting tension because when we encounter other members of our species, if I'm right, we can't help seeing them as human. It's this automatic response that I described a moment ago.
Yeah.
But we also defer to experts. Now, it's fine if the expert is a microphysicist. What if the expert is Joseph Goebbels, who assures us that Jews are subhumans? What if the expert is a 19th century American race scientist who tells us that people of African descent belong to another and inferior species? What if
Hmm.
they're a religious leader uh, who gives us this sort of propaganda? What if they're a radio host, a hate speech jock that gives
Yeah.
us this propaganda? Well, if we put them in that role of expert, then we defer. And this sets up a tension because, on one hand, then we see them as human, we can't help it. But on the other hand, we take on board the view of the expert. And by the way, the expert can be your parents, it could be your pastor. I grew up in the deep south in the 50s and 60s, and everyone had blatantly dehumanizing racist
Yeah.
ideas.
Is
Everyone in
that
my
where the cognitive dissonance comes in? Where on one
Yes,
hand you look at
here's
them
where the
and you see that.
cognitive
Okay.
dissonance comes in. Now, we're not going to stop there. So let me go a little bit further.
You're fine.
Here's
I'm
a
loving
fact
this.
about dehumanization. In the most toxic forms of dehumanization, the most dangerous ones, the ones that lead to genocide and extermination as violence, the dehumanized other is not simply seen as a subhuman animal, they're seen as a monstrous or demonic being. And that requires
Monsters
some
or demonic being.
explanation. So, for example, um, shortly after October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu said it was unclear if he was referring to Palestinians generally or to Hamas in particular. We're dealing with bloodthirsty monsters.
Uh huh.
Not wild animals or not people who do evil things, bloodthirsty monsters.
Yeah. Like Trump calling people vermin.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so there's so many examples of this.
Yeah.
In my book, Making Monsters, I have a whole chapter on the history of anti-Semitism, where we see how these ideas took shape in the Middle Ages and their remarkable persistence. I also talk a lot about the view of black men after the Civil War as monstrous beings.
Yeah.
It's very, very common
Super
in
predators,
situations
as
where
Clinton said.
extreme acts of violence are perpetrated, like lynching, which is something I study a lot.
Yeah.
Now, uh, what's a monster? Well, believe it or not, there's a mini academic discipline called monster theory. And there is one contributor to that literature who's influenced me a lot. He's a philosopher named Noel Carroll.
We
He wrote it.
spoke to Noel Carroll actually.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yes, we
Alpha.
did. We about a horror and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
We
We
Oh,
spoke
did.
to him.
philosophy of horror is like
Amazing.
it's an
One of the best
amazing book.
conversations we've had.
It's
Yeah,
most philosophy books, let's be honest, are pretty boring.
yeah.
And
It's like
philosophy of horror
trying
is
to get through Prolegomena in my undergrad
oh
was a
please,
horrific
yeah,
task.
no, no, no. I wouldn't wish it on my enemies. Um, but philosophy of horror, Noel Carroll's book is just wonderful.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Now, Carroll gives us a really interesting analysis. I change his terminology a little bit. I'm going to use my terminology here. A monster has to have two characteristics. They One is they have to be physically threatening. Like monsters aren't nice. They want to kill you. They want to do damage to you. Um, but that doesn't separate monsters from lots of other kind of dangerous beings like grizzly bears and rattlesnakes and serial killers and so on. Monsters have to also be what I call metaphysically threatening. Metaphys-
Metaphysically threatening.
yeah,
Like as in
metaphysically.
like axiomatically threatening,
No, no,
or
no, no. So here's the idea. So we all have this view of the natural order. And that natural order consists of various kinds of things like biological species and so on. And the picture is kind of there are these sharply bounded kinds of things, and they're mutually exclusive for reasons I can get into later. That comes back to essentialism.
Sure.
I don't want to complicate this bit of the conversation too much.
okay.
Mhm.
Um, right. So they're mutually exclusive. But if monsters combine these mutually exclusive kinds of things, so that's what makes them unnatural and disturbing.
Ah,
Right.
okay.
So here's a great example. This is actually Carol's example that I use a lot. Think of zombies in horror movies. They're dead and alive at the same time. They're decaying corpses, but they're walking around. They have metabolisms. They're trying to eat your brains and so on. They're not.
The
Yeah, go on.
I think their conception is contradictory. They're undead.
Exactly. They're impossible beings. They're
Okay.
contradictory beings, and it's contradictory beings that are metaphysically threatening.
Hmm.
They're disturbing in a unique way, which has often been called uncanniness. So let's think of another example from horror. This example actually I use a lot because there's a film. Well, let me start the sentence differently. Werewolves. Werewolves are wolves and humans, and they're
Yeah.
not like part wolf and part human. They're all wolf and all human, just like zombies are all dead and all alive. Um, imagine this. This might bring it home. Whatever room you're in, imagine you look over at the door and you see a hand, just a hand, crawling across the floor like a fleshy spider. That would be really, really disturbing.
Yes.
Now, why? I mean, just a hand, man. You could stomp on it. You could kick it away. That's not what makes it disturbing. What makes it disturbing is that hands and spiders are two different things. Hands aren't supposed to crawl. Okay, now if you get that idea, and if you get the idea, one further idea that dehumanized people, and again, this is linked with race. Maybe we can come back to that. are
Oh yeah.
generally regarded as dangerous, as criminal, as murderers, as rapists. You see this in all the standard examples.
Hmm.
Think of the cognitive discipline, dissonance, then, not discipline, dissonance. I see you as human, and I see you as subhuman, both at the same time, and I see you as dangerous. That turns you into a monster.
Mm.
Mm.
And the tragedy of this is dehumanized people are often the most vulnerable, the most marginalized people in the population. But this effect, this monsterization effect, causes them to be seen in the eyes of their persecutors as embodiments of evil, extremely formidable, extremely powerful.
Mm.
And of course, when you see others as monsters, then there aren't any rules. You
Yeah, you
destroy
got
the
to kill or
monster.
be killed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They're an existential threat. They're unnatural. They're evil.
Monsters don't
Whatever
have
it
the
takes.
essence of humanity.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
They're metaphysically contradictory.
They are. Yes.
They
You got it. You
so,
got it.
so
You
they
got
they
it.
pose not just like they don't even need to pose a physical threat. They literally pose a conceptual threat to the way we
They
understand humans,
that's right.
because our conception of them is so contradictory from their essence that the only way to deal with it is to dehumanize them cognitively. Is that where this is
No,
going?
no, this is actually a consequence of the dehumanization. So first we see
Okay.
them as animals, but then we see them as animals and humans simultaneously. That transforms them into monsters.
Hmm.
Uh,
So it's like there's a primary and a secondary um, phase
yeah.
Okay.
of at least this kind of dehumanization. Now, seeing
Ah.
them as physically dangerous is important for this kind of dehumanization, but there are other kinds of dehumanization where the physical threat is absent.
Well, what do you call that first type of dehumanization that we just
I call it
discussed?
demonizing dehumanization.
Demonizing humanization, where we
Yeah,
first see them as the animal, whether it be because you
that's
saw
right.
it in the news, or your pastor told it to you,
Yeah,
or an authority figure, and then you see the person, and
yeah.
you also realize they're a threat. That's demonization,
And
dehumanizing.
there, well, you see them, and you respond to them as a human being
Hmm.
and a threat. And so it starts with a threatening human being, right?
Yeah.
So think of Trump's famous remarks about Mexicans. Mexico's
Yeah.
not sending their
They're,
best
yeah, they're
murderers and
sending their
rapists,
rapists and murders. Yeah.
dangerous human beings. A bit
Yep.
later, he referred to them. I quote, "They're not humans; they're animals," and
Hmm.
that sets up that dissonance, that
Okay.
tension, which transforms them into monsters.
Got it.
Yeah, and that's the whole point is they don't have the essence. And that's why it is a philosophical question. And I love that you brought that up. I mean, it's
Mhm.
so important
I mean,
to
I'm still like
understand.
loving the idea of
Co-
metaphysical,
what did you
ah,
say? What?
Metaphysical
metaphysically
threat. Yeah,
metaphysically threatening. Yes, I love it.
yeah.
I love this
Yeah,
concept, metaphysically
yeah.
threatening.
So there's
The
a really
cognitive
interesting
dissonance.
literature that I didn't think of this just out of my own imagination.
Yeah.
There's the literature goes back to the very early part of the 20th century, um, and actually the pioneering paper was by a man named Ernst Jentsch, a German psychiatrist, called "The Psychology of the Uncanny."
Mm,
And, the German term is unheimlich, which uncanny doesn't quite do it justice. It's kind of creepy,
Okay.
disturbing, eerie. And what Jentsch argued is we get creeped out by things if
a
our mind
disturbing synchronicity kind of thing.
yeah if our minds are pulled in two directions at once and we can't settle.
Is that like it could be exemplified by like what people call the uncanny valley when you look at like
Yes, yes. So
images
that
of
was,
CG?
1970. A man named Masahiro Mori, a roboticist, coined the term. Um, uh, well, uncanny valley. Uncanny valley. Of course, uncanny is a translation from the German. Sorry, from the Japanese. The Japanese word is bukimi, which could equally well be translated as creepy. So the title of the paper could be uh,
The creepy
kind of
valley.
Creepy
the
Valley.
valley of creepiness.
I love it.
And basically, he says the same thing that Jentsch had said in 1906. I can't believe he didn't read Jentsch. And in between, there was an anthropologist named Mary Douglas who took a slightly different take, but it's the same kind of territory. And it's Douglas that Noel Carroll draws on extensively for his
Mm.
notion of, he calls it cognitive threat. What I call
Cognitive
metaphysical
threat.
threat, he calls cognitive threat.
I
Why do
think we
why do you
can't
choose to
ignore the
call it?
philosophy.
Yeah, why do you
Sorry.
choose to call it metaphysical threat as opposed to cognitive threat?
Because I think cognitive threat is too general a term, whereas metaphysical threat, I think, zooms in on exactly what's going on here. Now, metaphysics is all about what exists and what kind of things exist.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, what we have here is the idea of contradictory kinds of things exist, things that don't fit into the natural order, unnatural beings, impossible beings.
That idea of like completely seeing something in two complete ways, not
Yeah,
not half and half, but two complete whole things at the same
yeah,
time. That that's the
It's like
part that
2 equals 1, you know? It's like one of those things. Seeing
yes,
a
yes, yes,
2 equals 1 is metaphysically horrific.
exactly. Yeah. Think of
Okay.
it this way. If someone could be dead and alive, completely dead and completely alive, then anything can happen.
Mhm.
And
yeah.
horror movies really play on this. That sense of disorientation, which is a really important element, say on Nightmare on Elm Street, say, for example, right? Anything can happen, so one is totally vulnerable. There's no safety anywhere,
It's like the principle
and
of explosion. Anything can happen.
no, exactly. In fact, in On Inhumanity and in Making Monsters, I said that metaphysical threat is the existential counterpart of the logical principle of explosion. So you're right on the money there.
I
Mm,
see.
mm. Go ahead, Don Don.
No, I'm
I'm
just waiting
soaking
for.
this in. I'm loving this. This is
Yeah,
great.
I'm just wait. What's so we have the demon dehumanization,
Yeah.
that process. What's another one? What's
So
another
the
process?
other the other one, which I have not worked on too much, because the reason I
That's
do the
okay.
work
Don't
I
worry about it.
no, it's important. The reason
Oh,
that
I
I do
thought
the
you were
work.
worried about your phone dinging. I'm sorry.
Oh
Oh,
no,
that's
no,
you, Don Don. That's you, isn't it?
That's
no,
me.
no. My phone
I
is
don't know.
dinging, but it's
No, it's not
it's
me.
No, you're
actually
fine. You're fine, brother. It's okay.
it's my wife,
Yeah, we
who's
can
just
always
came
make
up.
the.
We have family from Jamaica visiting, and she's just
Oh,
Ah,
picked
okay.
them up at the airport. I told
I
her to
see.
keep me informed with text messages, so
Yeah.
Well, at the
so
end
I
of the
know when to
day,
get off this conversation and get ready for the Jamaicans who
You
would.
well, you tell us how long you can stay, my friend, as long
Yeah,
as you want
yeah.
to. So,
Okay. Well, I'm good for at least an hour.
okay,
okay,
good.
perfect.
All right. Well,
We're
we'll
we're at
And
about
continue.
40 minutes, so we have another like
Yeah,
20
yeah,
ish
we'll
minutes.
continue for a little bit longer. Don Don,
yeah,
reframe that for us.
because there's a lot to talk about
Yeah,
here.
so let's talk about this less explored version of
Okay,
dehumanization.
so
So
I
I
call
have,
it.
I have I have a two-part question. What is it, and why is that one less explored? Why do you feel like you've explored it less?
I've explored it less because I'm primarily interested in. Um, I it's a little bit complicated. So I've been primarily interested in genocidal violence,
Okay.
and genocidal violence typically involves demonizing dehumanization. And by the way, just by the way, it's very gendered. So it's males who are the primary targets of
Of course.
demonizing dehumanization.
Yeah.
If we look at lynching in the American South, for instance, there are 4,000 plus recorded cases,
Yep.
probably many more unrecorded cases. Horrific cruelty. Most Americans don't have a clue about the cruelty of lynching, the torture, the bodily mutilation.
I live in
I,
Alabama.
yeah, right, right. Well, I come from Florida, which would
Oh, okay.
per capita, the highest incidence of lynching in the United States.
Really?
Yeah,
North
Anything.
Florida, right?
uh, probably primarily North Florida. Yeah, although my hometown there was a lynching in the 30s. Um,
Mm,
so, and my hometown was in South Florida.
Yeah.
Um, so 90, more than 97% of the victims were men, black men. The other kind of dehumanization I call enfeebling dehumanization. In
Enfeebling. Okay.
enfeebling dehumanization, you have the metaphysical threat, but not the physical threat.
Okay.
Um, Now, the only examples of this I've studied at all carefully is the dehumanization of disabled people, particularly cognitively disabled people. And all of my research is basically concentrated on the Nazi so called euthanasia program,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They killed cognitively disabled children.
Thousands of mentally,
Yeah, yeah, no,
neurodevelop. If
tens
you
of
had any
thousands.
neurodevelopmental disorder,
Intellectually
you might as
disabled.
well.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah,
the
that's right.
There you go.
that's
And
the
they
term.
called them useless eaters. They used a term from Martin Luther, actually, who used it in exactly the same way. Massa carnis, a mass of flesh. Pediatrician said they were devoid of souls. They were just pieces of meat
Mm,
uh, to be disposed of. Right. So that's another kind. I need to do more research into that, but
yeah.
yeah.
So
Currently,
would this kind
my
of
full
thing
time.
be? I'm
Go ahead,
sorry, Don.
Thomas.
Don.
Go
Let's say
on.
currently my full time job is working with people with disabilities,
Right.
cognitive disability, mental disabilities, and
Yeah.
it's interesting because a lot of times when either people who haven't worked with them first interact,
Hmm.
they report feeling very disgusted by their
Hmm.
mannerisms, their
Hmm.
appearances, how they maneuver. But
Yeah.
the more you spend time with them, quickly you realize you're literally just a human. Like,
Yeah. So
there's
you gradually attribute a human essence
Yeah.
to them
yeah,
on the basis of familiarity.
Yeah.
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 interesting.
That's the
And
philosophical. That's the question. That we're answering with all this is, what is the essence?
What
How
is
do
the
we
yeah.
essence of a
how do
human?
we how do we define the essence in any other terms? I don't know, but I love
So
considering.
really, to understand the essence thing, we have to go to in my view, a psychological research program.
Hmm.
The term essence has been around for a couple thousand years,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and philosophers who love to split hairs have, you know, given various meanings to it.
Yeah.
Um, when I talk about essences, I'm referring to what psychologists call psychological essentialism, and that's the idea. This research program began in 1989 with a paper called Psychological Essentialism, and it's been very robust. There's been a lot of really good work on this, and basically the idea is this: we human beings are disposed to divide the world up into what philosophers call natural kinds, things that are discovered, not invented, that are out there in the world, whether we classify them or not: oxygen, hydrogen, biological species, and so on. Right, that's the first bit. But the second bit is that we're inclined to think that what makes any individual belong to one of these kinds is not how it looks. The appearance of a thing is merely symptomatic. It's what it is, in some sense, on the inside. And
Mm.
that on the insideness is what they call the essence. Now,
The psychological essentials. Yeah.
yes, that's right. So this is psychological essentials. So what makes a dog is not that it has four legs and goes woof woof.
Right.
It's got this inner dogginess, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
they
this is
think,
like the Psych 101. You take an elephant, cut off its ears, it's still an elephant. But if it
yeah,
was
yes,
small
that's
and was
right.
pink and had
That's
no
right.
legs, would it
That's
be an
right.
elephant? Yeah.
Now, this way of thinking comes very naturally to us. And it also allows, and this is super important for understanding dehumanization, that the appearance of a thing can belie its essence. It can be misleading because, just as you can have, say, um, a, um, a virus that is asymptomatic,
Hmm.
right? You
Yeah.
could have an essence that doesn't express itself in the typical,
As
visual
sickness.
observable
Yeah.
characteristics.
This thing called sickness that is another
Mm,
essence.
I
Yeah.
Yes,
see.
that's right. So,
I see what you're saying.
why is that important? Well, let's go back to where we began. Let's say you're Nazis, or you're a Nazi, Thomas.
Okay.
Dandan and I are Jews,
Wow.
and you see us as subhumans, but hey, we're indistinguishable visually from anyone you'd regard as a human. You know, I before I got old, I'm 70 now, but before I got old, I was 6'4". I had blonde hair. I've got blue eyes. I don't have any kind of a Semitic appearance. You might consider me a member of the master race
Yeah.
if you didn't know that I was a Jew. But knowing I'm a Jew, I am a subhuman. So here's what's going on. You're attributing to me the essence of a subhuman creature despite my appearance. So I'm sort of a counterfeit human being. Just like a counterfeit
Mm.
$20 bill, if it's a good counterfeit, looks just like a real one, but
Right.
it's not a real one. So I look just like a human being, but I'm not a real human being. Now, this way of thinking comes very, very naturally to us. Let me give you two examples. Let's push the rewind button on time and go back to the year 1215. That's when the Roman Catholic Church decided that the sacramental host, the biscuit, the cracker that
Yeah.
you use at communion,
Transubstantiates.
Yeah.
yes,
Transubstantiation. Yeah.
that's when it became official that this was literally the body of Christ, not metaphorically,
Yeah.
Literally.
literally. Now you might think, well, yeah, but that doesn't look like a first century Palestinian Jew, now does it? It looks like a cracker. Uh, but that didn't stop people. Why? Because they could say, well, it merely appeared to look like to be a cracker, but its essence is the body of Christ.
Essence.
As incidentally, that move on the part of the church led to persecutions of Jews who were accused of stealing the hosts and torturing them as a way of murdering Christ all over again.
Yeah, and they still
Uh,
have that grudge about Jews killing Jesus.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
It's
I think
coming back
Thomas is
too. It's coming
he's
back
it's an
hardcore.
earlier conversation from today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm very worried about the resurgence of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, of course, of course.
anyway, so how could people think that? Well, they're psychological essentialists. That's how they could think it. Now let's think of something closer to home. You're watching a horror movie. It's about a vampire. The vampire looks like a human being, but we know on the inside the vampire is something different, right? The vampire is not a human being. We have no trouble with that. It doesn't puzzle us in the least. Why? Because we are natural essentialists, right?
I see.
Even though psychological essentialism is totally inconsistent with science, right? It's
Really.
completely that. It's not a scientific picture. It's a pre-Darwinian notion,
Okay.
but it's so built into our way of thinking about things. Um,
Is this the type of dehumanization that trans folks face?
yeah, yeah.
Because
Well,
on
no,
the
right.
outside, they
Yes,
present
yes,
as
yes,
one
yes,
gender, but
yes. So
essentially people feel that
no,
inside it's like a lie and
exactly
therefore it's
right. So
disgusting.
so
Okay.
transphobia is arises from, I think, a sense of metaphysical threat that, and so this is going to happen in societies where there are rigid distinctions between the genders,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the genders are treated as essentialized natural kinds. Trans people then are seen as unnatural beings that transgress those boundaries. They're metaphysically threatening, and this elicits this powerful sense of aversion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I see
Go
this. So
ahead,
the
Donna.
demonization, the demonized dehumanization is
Yeah.
one that's based upon threat, and the
Yes.
Yeah,
other one
physical threat
is,
as well as metaphysical threat,
Yeah.
and this one is metaphysical threat
without
with
without
with
Because
necessarily
yeah,
physical.
because the transgenderism is
but
being
the
attacked.
essentialization is the problem. It's like the
Yeah,
metaphysical threat is in contrast with the essential nature of what
that's
this
right. Because
appearance is.
Oh, okay.
the essence is supposed to be unique to a kind, right?
Hmm.
So if you essentialize genders, all males have a male essence, all females have a female essence, but trans people elicit this contradictory response from people who essentialize in that kind of way.
Hmm.
Male essence and female essence. That's like the crawling hand, right? That's like the zombie. That
Yeah.
elicits a disturbing sense of aversion.
Yeah. And I see how that. Wow, that's really interesting to think about the way that you
That is
frame
super interesting to think about.
that. I enjoyed that. So, like, could you call it an essence threat? Could I also call it that?
Yeah, you could.
Okay. I do
Essence
understand what you
threatening,
mean
yeah.
by metaphysical, and I think that's the more proper way to do it. But
Mhm.
I just want to solidify it in my
Yeah,
mind.
no,
Hopefully,
that works. Yeah.
hopefully, our viewers can learn a little bit more
I
about
mean,
it.
essence is a metaphysical notion, so
Yeah,
it's
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
a slightly different way of expressing the same idea.
So with
There's a,
all this work, have you how do how do people overcome, or what is the ways that you find people actually exit this type of dehumanization, or is that something you've even like looked at?
Well, this is really hard. Um, um, in the really dangerous, the most dangerous kinds of dehumanization, um, we can take. Let's take two examples. In Europe, uh, dehumanization of Jews, and in the United States, the dehumanization of people of African descent. I say African descent because I don't believe in race. I'm a race skeptic.
yeah, I'm a
Uh,
race skeptic as well.
I
we're
think
with you.
race,
We're
and
with
in
you.
fact, I'm not merely a skeptic. I think the whole idea of race has
I
nothing
think
to do
I
except
think
for
in
it's evil
biology it has no meaning.
and
Race only
it's
exists insofar
destructive.
as it's a social construct that people just believe and
But
act by.
yeah,
So
well, let's say racial categories exist. It, it gets tricky when we say race exists because it sounds like we're attributing a property to people.
Yeah.
mhm.
I would like to say, yeah, a lot of people believe in race and they act on those beliefs. But I think those beliefs are just essentially violent. I mean, it's race has always been a tool for legitimating oppression and violence and just awful, awful things. And if you ask yourself, well, what good has it done and what harm has it done? Put those two on a balance. Well, one really ridiculously outweighs the other. If you think that virtually every genocide in the last 150 years has involved racialization, that's
Yeah.
sufficient.
Yeah, it's
Um,
always about the race thing. It is. It's not my kind. My kind's gonna
that's
go
right.
away. My kind's gonna go away if I let people into my kind, extra people into my
Well,
kind.
so I call
You know.
racism actually dehumanization. I call dehumanization racism on steroids.
Ah.
Uh,
Hmm.
because when
Okay.
we racialize people, we demote them in the category of the human. They're lesser humans. And dehumanization takes a step further. They're excluded, they're ejected from the category of the human altogether. So that's why I think of it this way. And racialization of this kind, demonizing, dehumaniz rather, let me start that sentence again. I'm getting ahead of myself. Demonizing dehumanization is very typically preceded by the racialization of the group that becomes dehumanized.
Okay. Okay.
So there's a continuum there. So how do we deal with that? Well, unfortunately, in these two cases, the dehumanizing attitudes towards Jews and towards people of African descent in the United States is so cemented into the foundations of European and American culture um,
Yeah.
that it's very easily reawakened.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so, in situations of crisis, where people feel vulnerable, where they feel helpless, an economic downturn or a war, uh, these things very readily, like zombies, they come back to life.
Sure.
Hmm.
They're reawakened, um, and it's not clear to me how to make those things go away.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I
That's
think
the question, right?
I
What's
think
the cure?
I think our focus needs to be on protections, trying to
Mm.
constrain these things and trying to prevent them from being reawakened because they're sitting there like dry kindling, waiting for a match to catch on fire. So I think there are several fronts here. One is educational. So I think it should be a part of everyone's education to understand. uh, two things, one of which I haven't talked about actually. One is the essentialistic bias, the cognitive bias towards essentialism.
Yeah.
Um, so we can keep track of it. We're all vulnerable to that. There's no
Yeah.
vaccine, right? So,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
we need to be vigilant. The other, which is also extremely important for dehumanization, is hierarchical thinking. The idea that there are
Mm-hmm.
higher and lower beings.
Yep.
So those two things, which are
More
both
evolved, less evolved type of thinking.
exactly, those are totally both inconsistent with our best science,
That's right.
but they are very hard to resist. And let's call it education in human nature, which is different from what you're going to learn in Psych
STEM.
101, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is what we need to monitor ourselves. We also need proper historical education.
I think so.
And I teach a course on race and racism. I taught it this semester, and my students, I teach in a small liberal arts uh, university. So you think these are fairly well educated students, but they have no idea of the horrific history.
Oh yeah. Well, most people don't.
They
Most people
don't,
don't even know what happened.
particularly Americans, right?
What was
Because
it? Was it Tulsa where they basically?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 They
They,
even
they,
bombed. They dropped bombs out of airplanes
yeah.
on the black neighborhood.
Nobody knows that happened.
There were many what were called spectacle lynchings, attended public events that were attended by sometimes 20 or 20,000 people. The media was
Yeah.
present. The victim was tortured, sometimes made to eat their own body parts. They're horrific things.
Ah.
So we need to emulate the Germans here and educate people in real history and get over this stupid American exceptionalism business. And the
Yeah.
reason for that is education in real history has the power to inculcate an attitude of humility. We did this. We did this. That means we're capable of doing it. Maybe we'll do it again. Maybe we're doing it now and we don't know it. You see, so these are important things, but also we need to support social institutions that offer some protection, freedom of speech, an independent
Mhm.
judiciary, a free press, things of this nature. Now, all those things can be subverted. Hitler complained about being silenced,
Yeah. He did.
being canceled by, there
Yeah.
were posters of Hitler with the Nazis made in the
Hmm.
early days with tape over his mouth. It's oddly contemporary. But these offer some protections. I think there are two things that are super important, more important than any of those things. And they're related. So bear with me a second.
Okay.
Dehumanization is typically a response to propaganda. It's people in positions of power and authority who want us to do terrible things to others. Um, Now, I've done a lot of work on propaganda because of its relationship with dehumanization, both on Inhumanity and Making Monsters has a lot about propaganda.
Mm.
And basically, my view, which I take from a remarkable man named Roger Monicarl, who was a PhD in philosophy, anthropology, and a psychoanalyst.
Wow. A polymath.
Um, and he had the opportunity to observe Hitler and Goebbels in action,
Mm.
um, is that authoritarian propagandists do two things. They make their listeners feel vulnerable, helpless, and then they offer salvation from that
Yeah.
helplessness,
Yeah.
right? And they're most effective when they can exploit real vulnerability. So, it was the Great Depression that was a boon to the Nazis. They didn't do very well before the Depression uh, in the elections, but the Depression, the
Help
pain, the
them.
vulnerability, combined with
Yeah.
the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles and the inflation that came right after
This
that.
is how the demagogues sweep in. You know what I
Exactly. The
mean?
violence in the street, the battles between the right wing groups and the left wing groups.
Yeah.
This really gave, the Nazis the opportunity to say, we will put an end to this. We're the
Yeah.
law and order people. We will recover the economy. We will make Germany great again. And that's
Well,
literally what we
yeah.
said.
What do you think about Trump saying he's going to be a dictator for the first day? You
Well,
think
look,
about
I
that? I'm
I've been
just playing.
writing about
You don't
Trump.
have to.
I've been writing about Trump since
Go ahead,
2015
please.
because when he made his first speech, when he threw his hat into the ring, it followed that playbook to the letter, to the letter. The playbook that Money Carl, the man I just mentioned, described Hitler and Goebbels using. First, you make the audience feel helpless, hopeless, and depressed. We're the laughing stock of the world. Everyone's taking advantage of us. That's exactly what he did. Then you get them paranoid. The Mexicans are not
Yeah,
sending their best, they're sending rapists and murderers. Then you offer magical solution as a savior. Only I
can help it.
can make America great again.
That's right.
So I was warning people from day one, and my progressive friends,
Yeah.
would pat me on my head and say, "Silly boy, this is just a joke." I said, "No, you don't get it. You really don't get it. This is powerful
No,
stuff."
it's scary and it is powerful. Don Don,
Yeah.
what do you think about that? About Trump saying that?
I mean, you know what I think about Trump. I think he's the most dangerous doofus that the world has seen in a really
Yeah.
long time.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
it's a type of he's an extremely intelligent narcissist, and he
Mhm.
just follows the crowd as the crowd wants him to
Yeah,
do,
he's a
and
salesman,
he
right? He's
yeah
got a gut feeling about what works. I don't think he's got it up here.
yeah he's not a real politic, right? He doesn't actually know what he's doing.
And he
He
always
just
tells us,
does.
but he tells us exactly what he's going to do,
Yes, he
too,
does,
right?
and no
And
one
people
believes
don't
him,
believe
and
it.
no one believes him.
We should believe him. So anyway, this works best when there's real vulnerability to exploit. And what that implies is if we want to protect ourselves from dehumanization, we need a society with proper safety nets. People need to have jobs. They need to have enough to eat. They need to have health care,
Yes.
right? We need to attend to people so they
Basic needs.
don't
Yes.
feel endangered in a way that
Yes.
authoritarian politicians can exploit.
I believe it is good to help the weakest among us. I think that's
Yes.
yeah.
No,
Yeah, it's not only morally good, but it's prudentially good, right? It
Yes.
protects us
Yes.
from the
from the
evils.
Hitlers of the
We are
world.
We
stronger overall if we focus on increasing the weak people's place in society and
Yeah,
less hierarchical thinking. And
right.
I also want to throw in one thing, and just random. I think psychology should be taught in high school.
Absolutely. And
hundred
proper
percent.
history should be taught in high school
Yeah,
too.
Yeah,
proper history. I find it really absurd that psych is not taught in high school. We learn biology, but you don't
Yeah,
learn about your mind as a part of that biological
yeah, yeah,
entity.
yeah.
We are at the hour mark, and I just
yeah.
want
We
to
don't want to keep you too
we don't
long,
want to keep
David.
it for too
Yeah,
long. So if you ever
I
have
can
to,
give you like 10 minutes if you want.
Okay,
okay.
cool.
One of the things that's been on my mind is twofold. One of them has been that while we are talking about like these fascistic playbooks that people are Trump has done
Yeah,
after October 7th, in Israel, even though Bibi talks about the monsters, his approval ratings are in the tank,
of course.
right? There's
Yeah,
but it seems to not be working.
yeah,
Calling the monsters, his approval are still in the tanks,
yeah,
and at the same time, even though Israelis as a whole are not approving of this monster narrative that he's pushing, in the United States and the rest of the world, we're seeing this type of dehumanization happening to Jews who have nothing to do with the state of Israel.
exactly. Yeah.
Can you like give the audience an insight about what is happening here? Why is it failing for BB, and at the same time we are seeing a lot of why is it what's happening basically like in
Well,
that
uh,
because
I'm not an expert on this, and I don't like
yeah
to bullshit about things I really don't know about. So take this with a grain of salt.
yeah
Okay.
But there is very considerable opposition. Israel is a really divided country,
yes.
uh, politically and ideologically, and so on. And there's
They
very
haven't formed a
considerable
government for 3 years up until this point.
opposition to the occupation, um, and there's very considerable opposition to the construction of Palestinians as essentially other.
Yeah.
So we got this division, and in Israel. Um, in the United States, however, there are certain elements outside of Israel that are very, very keen
Yeah.
to racialize Jews.
Christian nationalists.
Yes, and this hasn't gone away. It's been latent. It's just been socially unacceptable to say out loud for the most part. But now that, Twitter is taking, or what used to the artist formerly known as Twitter, is taking the stops
Yeah.
out, right? And the anti Semites are coming out of the woodwork, and they have some plausible deniability here. And you see the racialization. It's not the government of Israel, the present government of Israel, it's the Jews. The
Hmm.
Jews. That's dangerous. Remember, dehumanization is racism on steroids.
Yeah.
Mm,
Talk of the
Don,
Jews.
mm.
Anti Semitism is racism. A lot of people don't get it. Most of
yeah.
my students have to learn that because they don't learn it in high school.
Don Don's from Israel.
Yeah, I grew
Yeah.
up in Israel. Yeah.
Okay, so you know better than me.
No, I struggle to understand the the failure, like, because I do recognize how divided the country is. I have some family
Yeah.
members who speak very dehumanizing, and I like
Yeah, yeah,
try to call them out right away, and it's usually tied with the religious identity as well
yeah,
in Israel. But
yeah.
Israel is half of it is a secular country,
That's
and
right.
that's where there's a
Yeah,
lot of friction happening
yeah,
within the country. And
yeah,
what's shocking me, that within a secular country like the United States, it's in secular places that we're seeing the anti-Semitism come out of,
yeah.
which is what's difficult for me to wrap it around. Like, it's so difficult for me to understand it. That so
Yeah, it's not easy for me to understand either. I think we have to bear in mind it minimally to understand this, we have to assume it's never gone away. It's just
it's
been
never
late.
gone away. It's just been latent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this gives an opportunity. It's lighting the dry kindling. Um,
Okay.
Yeah.
and in Europe too, right?
And then Europe
Absolutely.
too.
My maternal grandparents came to the United States early 20th century. Their families to escape the pogroms in Eastern Europe, and I thank God they're no longer alive because this would break their hearts. What we see happening now, and I
Yeah.
find it really frightening. I wear my Star of David uh, whenever I can, and making a judgment that I'm safe.
Yeah.
But if I'm traveling abroad, I tuck it under my shirt sometimes.
I hear you. Yeah. I hear you.
Sometimes it's kind of like going to Europe and putting a Canada sticker on your bags
Yeah, yeah.
instead of an American. You know,
Hey, that's a great
isn't
idea.
that a good idea?
I like, yeah.
Well, we don't want to keep you too much longer. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
this has been one of the most fun conversations for me, David. So I really appreciate learning from you.
Oh, I've enjoyed it very much.
It's
Yeah.
been
Thank you.
amazing. It's been
I really,
amazing.
I have never thought of the idea of metaphysically horrific. I'm
Yeah.
loving it.
Yeah.
I'm this is my new thing right now. I don't know how else I'm gonna, but I'm definitely gonna be reading your graduate level book.
Okay.
Um,
Well, you can
but
read both of them.
Well,
yeah,
you taught me
Well,
something
the,
about
the first
psychological.
one, the first
Yeah,
one, Less Than Human. I was just trying to work things out as I went along.
okay.
yeah,
The
So
other two are much
which
more
one do you
fun.
recommend I should read after?
Start with Inhumanity,
Okay,
and then go to Making Monsters.
Making
That's
monsters and
that's the
humanity.
best sequence. And
and
then
then
if you
go back
want
to
to,
your
you can go back to the first one. There's a lot of
yeah.
historical stuff in there which you might find interesting.
Interesting.
But also, look, if you're interested in this stuff, subscribe to my Substack, free
There you
subscription.
go.
It's
Oh,
called
you have a
Dehumanization
Substack? Oh,
Matters.
absolutely. Everyone subscribe to the
And I got
Substack.
lots of
Please,
What is it
essays
called?
on race and dehumanization,
yeah.
dehumanization in the news, stuff going on in Israel and
You
in
know what?
Ukraine.
Go to University of New England and take his course.
Well, I don't teach it I teach about race, but I don't teach dehumanization.
Sure.
Oh, okay. Wouldn't that
I
be
could
nice if there
squeeze it
was?
into my courses, right?
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. Well, all right. You taught me a lot about psychological, essentialism. I love
Yeah,
the idea of that. I love the idea of metaphysical threats and the
cool.
difference between demon. Just to recap for the audience, the
Yeah,
demonizing,
demonizing,
dehumanization, and the enfeebling
enfeebling. Yeah,
dehumanization. Yeah, and there's a lot to think about there, and I think people are going to chew on this for a while. So I'm
awesome.
going to go ahead Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and plug my channel, which is Thomas Panter or the Pangburn Universe on YouTube. Don Prager, my best friend over here, he is on the Pangburn Universe. Search his name, Don Prager, Pangburn Universe. You'll get there. And also go read David's books because they're gonna they're gonna teach you a lot about the stuff that we just talked about.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we love
Bye
you
bye
all.
now.
Thanks for coming, and we're gonna go ahead and end the broadcast. Good night.
Okay. Bye bye now. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye.